1 o'clock. It's 1 minute left. And we need to be out of the room at 4.
Okay.
There is another meeting.
Okay. I think I'll try to keep it to about a half an hour, and then we'll have a half an hour.
The thing is if you need more time, that extra meeting.
Yeah.
Can wait.
Yeah. What?
If you need more time, we'll continue this at a bar somewhere.
Yeah. That sounds good.
As time unfolds, it'll be easier to understand everything you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. You'll be like, I get it. Yeah.
We need time to grasp the material. Time and space.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're checking the broadcast. Yeah, there is a delay, so that we can censor the material.
Yeah, okay, wait a minute.
Yeah.
So we can censor that.
Some of our speakers were very felt it's very convenient to have this delay.
Oh, yeah. First, yeah, to eliminate controversy.
Yes.
But it's not going to echo.
No.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, please, Laureen, the floor is yours.
Okay.
Welcome.
Well, this is really exciting, and thank you guys. What you guys are doing here, I think, is really amazing. And I think I didn't know about it until recently, and I think more people should know about it. I think it's just a great network building, sort of sharing opportunity that I don't think is not necessarily typical. Anyway, so thank you for inviting me today to talk about my latest research on indicators. So I want to just give you guys a little bit of background because I know that my disciplinary background is a little is diverse, and not everybody is clear on what I do and where I come from. So so I'm going to give you a little bit of background first on what sort of informed the research. Oh, that's not the.
Yeah, I think you can use it from here. Yes.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to give you a bit of background on what informed my research, where I come from in terms of discipline, in terms of academic communities, and just kind of where this research came from. So as you saw on the title slide, I'm talking about indicator sets, and what I'm talking about is not so much the indicator set specifically, but the politics and practicalities at a more broader level, at a broad scale. And its impact on environmental governance. So as far as background goes, I kind of locate myself in 3 different academic communities. The first one is international development studies. I'm going to log out of my thing so it doesn't keep open. Sorry, guys. So in terms of these academic communities, the first one is international development studies, which is sort of the discipline where I did my PhD. But within international development studies, there are many different kind of sub-disciplines and branches. And so I really kind of grew up academically in the branch known as environment and development, or what is also known as political ecology. And these are disciplines that sort of look at how environmental change and environmental policy, so solutions, have different impacts on different people depending on geographic, demographic, racial, income divides, etc. So differential impacts of both environmental change and environmental policy. So that's the first academic community. The second academic community is known as interpretive policy analysis. And so interpretive policy analysis is a subdiscipline of policy analysis that looks at policy and policy making and policy analysis not as sort of this conventionally, what is kind of understood conventionally as a linear process, right? Knowledge to policy, speaking truth to power, this kind of conventional approach to policy. But interpretive policy analysis looks more at communication, emotion, argumentation, discourse, etc., as elements of policymaking that sort of mess up and politicize the kind of more classical, linear approaches to policy analysis. And second, yes?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is that also related to
Diffusion, perhaps. Learning communities, like that kind of thing. Learning networks, perhaps. Yeah, definitely. So network governance and looking at different influences on governance, the idea that we don't just sort of create knowledge that then fills an information gap in policy processes, that it's about, argumentation, different methods, means of communication, etc. So I'm not totally familiar with the term diffusion, but it probably is relevant. Okay, and thirdly, I locate myself in science and technology studies, or STS research. And what STS does is it sort of deconstructs the taken for granted often in terms of knowledge communities, and, for example, looks at what becomes invisible about how we make sense, how we create knowledge. For example, it looks at the social and political influences on creating categories, standards, measurements. That these aren't just sort of natural categories that exist in their own right, but they're created under certain social and political influences. So those are the three sort of academic communities where I locate myself. So the second influence on on starting this research and doing research on indicators and sustainability indicators is that I had done my PhD in Paraguay. And as a part of that research, I was looking at the soy industry in Paraguay, which many of you have heard me talk about before. It's something that I've spent quite a bit of time researching. And I examined how a soy certification scheme emerged during a very tumultuous time in the history of the soy industry. And so there were a lot of boycotts against soy, a lot of boycotts against soy production because of all the problems it was causing in South America: deforestation, environmental degradation, soil degradation, but also social impacts like the displacement of small producers, small landholders, huge political sort of upheavals, etc. And so soy was being indicted in kind of large-scale environmental destruction, irresponsible pesticide use, even things like land grabbing. So the certification scheme that I looked at was sort of a multi-stakeholder process that developed technical guidelines for the production of what became known as responsible soy, as opposed to not irresponsible soy. And these standards were basically practices that would mitigate the negative effects of soy production. So this was seemingly a much needed and long-awaited move in environmental governance, but instead of consensus and progress in terms of the development of these technical standards, what we found was that what I found in my research and others have found as well, that this sort of certification scheme became the site of contention, conflict, huge disagreement about who decides what is good, what is responsible, what is sustainable, and what kind of trade-offs are acceptable and unacceptable, etc. So this is, I see this kind of, this research on sustainable cities and indicators for sustainable cities as a part of kind of what I'm imagining as being a trilogy of research on sustainable indicators. So we have the products, places, and people. The products was the sustainable soy. The people is yet to come, but this kind of takes the place of sustainable places, so sustainable cities. So that's kind of where it fits in my research trajectory. And thirdly, I'm interested, and I've been long interested in looking at the politics of sustainability. So sustainability not as a technical category, not as a technical concept, but a political concept. And I think what makes me even more interested is coming to WPI, starting to teach young people, and understanding that their assumptions and their understandings of sustainability are so much different than mine. They're so apolitical. They see sustainability as this progressive, high-tech, progressive, lucrative, very stylish kind of concept, and that it's good and moral. And so it's interesting to me how sustainability has really taken the environmental movement from a radical stance against global capitalism, against exploitation of the environment, to a more sort of reformist approach to environment, where we can sort of work within the system and develop high-tech solutions to sustainability issues. So you can see how the environmental sustainability really has had this huge impact on the environmental movement, and therefore sort of really warrants attention in terms of what are the political inputs and implications of this kind of understanding of what sustainability is. So hopefully that kind of doesn't give you I hope that wasn't too exhaustive, but hopefully that gives you some background on kind of where this comes from, where this is situated, and where my research has been, where it's headed, and how this kind of fits.
Can you just pause for one small
Yes.
definition issue?
Yeah.
When you mentioned sustainability, I remembered that this question was asked of Jay Forrester in one of his interviews, and he gave a very simple answer. He asked, "What do you understand by sustainability?" And he said, "Equilibrium." Is this what you mean? Is it something else?
It's something else. So the way that that I look at in environment and development, the way we look at sustainability is equilibrium is one way of looking at it, but I think equilibrium is it's a very ecologist approach to sustainability. So it's very environmental, I think.
They'll also talk about steady state. What is it? Mike, what is it?
Steady state economy.
John Stuart Mill, you're leading Malthus, classical.
Classical.
Right.
Smith, Ricardo, and Malthus all talk about
Stationary
it.
state.
Stationary state. Right. So, so in environment and development, we look at sustainability as a three-pronged issue. It's environmental, indeed, and economic, which is where this sort of equilibrium concept might come into play. But there's also a justice and social element to it, where, I guess you could put this in terms of equilibrium as well, but sort of an equity piece to it, where people, as I was saying before, from a political ecology standpoint, where certain groups of people determined by race, income, geography, etc., are not disproportionately, don't disproportionately suffer the costs or enjoy the benefits of environmental change or environmental policy. So I think it's like the equilibrium, yes, but I think the equilibrium is in many dimensions, and so I think it refers to a piece. For me, equilibrium is more of it really focuses on the environmental piece of it, but kind of leaves, and maybe the economic to a certain extent. But sustainability has long been, so for the past at least 30 years, it's been very much, people started doing research on the implications and the impacts of sustainability policy and found that often it would simply redistribute environmental goods and bads. So you clean up a city core, for example, you create a sustainable city and you just push the polluting industries out to the peripheries. So this idea of displacing environmental goods and bads. And that's where sustainability started taking into consideration equity in distributing goods and bads. So I think that too you could relate to equilibrium in a way. Does that?
Yeah, actually, it also means equilibrium in non-tangible steps.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so moving on. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is now. So now that background aside, let's move on to look at the STAR program. And the STAR program is the actual indicator set that I researched, that I looked at, or that I talked to people about. So STAR stands for Sustainability Tools for Assessing and Rating Communities. STAR communities. It's a system for basically assessing sustainability, for calculating a sustainability score, which we'll look at in a second. But essentially, what the STAR system is comprised of is 7 goal areas. So you can see the goal areas across the top, and this then goes back to that idea that sustainability is about more than just clean rivers and nice parks, right? It's very much expanded to include sort of city resilience, livability, equity. So there are a lot of different components. 20 years ago, you would not have seen a sustainability indicator set with these 7 goal areas. Today, this is considered progressive.
You've got a logo up there. Is there a federal proponent? Is this an agency that promotes this, or is a proponent of this?
Good question. It's not a federal, it's not a government initiative. It's an NGO initiative. There's an NGO called ICLEI, which you might know from the Agenda 21. ICLEI is an international organization that deals with municipal, community-based sustainability. And we're very much part of the Agenda 21 movement, et cetera. So it was ICLEI, the U.S. Green Building Council, and the Center for American Progress that launched the concept of STAR back in 2007. In 2008, they had established a formal partnership that included the National League of Cities. And these 4 organizations together started STAR. Today we have STAR as an organization in and of itself with staff. And so they direct themselves, but they have a board of directors then that is comprised of members of these different organizations. But that's where it got its start. So that was 2007 that it was sort of conceptualized. And then in 2012, by 2012, the first version of the STAR indicator set was released. It was developed by 120 experts on 8 technical committees. And it was released and piloted and evaluated by a set of pilot communities. So that was in 2012, so fairly recently. It's quite a new project, new program. In 2013, STAR was made available to US and Canadian cities. Canada has not. There are a few STAR communities in Canada, but not really, it's quite negligible. There are about 80 STAR communities now, or communities that are active within the STAR program, about 80 in the US. So to give you an idea of how predominant it's become or how popular it's become, there are about 80 communities participating. And in 2015, by 2015, which was just last year, 2 5-star communities, which we'll talk about what that means in a second, have been certified. One of them is actually our neighbor Northampton. And for anybody who's visited Northampton, it might not surprise you that it's, a 5-star, a real pilot sort of sustainable city, and Seattle, Washington, which might not also surprise you. So 80 communities and they're ranging in their degree of participating, reporting, and being certified. And we'll look at that in a second.
I think Sustainable Seattle was one of the very first groups to...
Right.
Well, growing up in Seattle, that's always been a topic of high interest to the city.
Right, yes. And so they've been a real pioneer in developing a city plan for sustainability. So this is separate, but related. But this is a separate program, a separate reporting procedure, a separate set of indicators than their sustainable city, than their sustainable Seattle. It's called Sustainable Seattle, I think, right?
It was.
And it's still active. It's still
I just know Earth Day was a citywide holiday going back into the 80s.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it doesn't surprise you that they're one of the high achievers in STAR. So let's go back. I just want to show you a little bit about what's in here. So you see the 7 goal areas across the top. I won't read them out. You can read them. You can look at them. And then underneath each goal area, you've got a total of 44 sustainability, what they call sustainability objectives. But then each of these blocks, these objectives, also open up to show you the individual indicators that are used to measure each of the objectives. And then all of the objectives, of course, measure the goal areas. So it's nicely organized. It's all systematic and systematic. So in total, there are 526 individual indicators that are measurable, that are measured, that accumulate points, areas where cities can accumulate points towards their final rating. So in here, these are all representative of 526 indicators. So it's a massive program. It's a real massive system. So what was kind of the mission of STAR? Why was it developed? It was developed to address the needs. This is quotes from the report, to address the needs of U.S. cities, towns, and counties seeking a common framework for sustainability. So it's all about developing a national framework, developing a common language, developing something that a measurable, comparable. They emphasize, STAR emphasizes that it's not a rating system, it is a rating system, it's not a ranking system. So they very much emphasize the idea that this is collaborative, that it's about sharing best practices. It's not about ranking compared to others and claiming higher status than others. And what ends up happening kind of are two different things. But the intent is to inform and advance a race to the top for the quality of life of residents, not to start comparing cities and say, we're more sustainable than you, we're better than you. And the other really main focus of much more than it is vocabulary, the words, the indicators, the parameters of sustainability, but it's much more than a vocabulary, and it's also about defining what is sustainability, what do we understand as sustainability, what are the associated practices, and what are the associated institutions. So you can see it's not just a vocabulary; it's about advancing the development of a standardized culture around sustainability. And so these indicator sets become an efficient and effective way of establishing the goalposts of debate, which an old professor of mine always talked to us about how discourses aren't just words, they're not empty, they're not unimportant, but they really very much establish the goalposts of debate. What's important, what's relevant, what's unimportant, irrelevant, etc. And so very much you can see that this STAR indicator system does this for sustainability in U.S. cities, or is attempting to do that. So it kind of becomes the reference for sustainability in U.S. cities. So a few more logistics. So here it's a point-based system. So there are different certification levels that communities can achieve. If you have between 50 and 199 points, you are a reporting community. So they're not going to brand you with exactly. They're not going to brand you with a 1 or 2 star rating, because that's really not very nice performance. So they've kind of eliminated the 1 or 2 stars. You're reporting. You're trying. You get an E for effort as long as you are between 50 and 199 points. Under 50, I'm not too sure. I guess they're not even considered reporting quite yet. Or maybe it's just because no reporting community has ever, clocked in at fewer than 50 points, because it's basically impossible. So then the next sort of rankings are not a ranking but a rating. The next ratings are 3, 4, and 5 star, and you can see the corresponding number of points. So if you get 200 to 399 points, you're a 3 star, recognized for sustainability leadership. 4 star, recognized for national excellence. There aren't that many 4 star yet. We probably have about 12 4 star communities. And then the 5 star communities are recognized as a top tier achiever in sustainability, and they get 600 plus points. Total points possible? Well, of course it would be impossible to get full points on everything, because it wouldn't happen. There's always room for improvement. But there's a total of about 1,700 possible points. If you're getting maximum points in every category, that would be about 1,700 points. So that gives you an idea of where the 5 star communities need to be. So do you guys have any questions about the system?
Yeah, I'm thinking of the university ranking system.
Yeah.
And we gained that system to get higher ranking. That doesn't mean that our education system is any better, especially for sustainability. How do they do it? Do people gain the system?
You are previewing my results, but yes, absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and that is basically the story here, is that these ratings for sustainability need to be looked at as outputs of political processes, as opposed to definitely.
Yeah, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, it's not exactly this, but you get points for doing things Beacon Hill wants done.
Right.
The more points you get, the more state aid can be funneled to the town, so they're trying to motivate you to work on whatever they want done.
Right, so, and that actually, we'll talk about that. That came up in this as well. Something we call going for the low-hanging fruit, or how this sort of aligns governance priorities, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Having been involved in some of these exercises from the federal standpoint, like OMB and the Pentagon, I'm interested in how, you said there were 8 committees of 120 experts, and I'm noticing that each expert seemed to have 2.5 measures. It kind of like there's 500 measures and 8 goals. Were the committees themselves ending up aligning to those goals? So they pretty much so it's an equity and stakeholder sort of representation of we're this committee, this is our goal, and here are, okay, just checking. Interesting.
Yeah. So basically, we've just reviewed all of my findings. Yes. I mean,
Okay.
you guys are really, you're very much previewing the
Well, I
findings.
love the term
yeah.
interpretive policy analysis, because that's what I think is needed, is how these things come about and what happens in the process of creating them, because there's a lot of gaps there, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. And not looking at them as clean processes that get mixed up by politics, right? But rather processes that are inherently political in and of themselves. Yeah. Yeah.
Excuse me. One of our online viewers is asking a question: why are there so many indicators? That's the question.
So why are there so many indicators? Well, I mean, it's something that we'll talk about in a minute as well. But in short, there are so many. It's part of, indicator sets have been developed and critiqued for 50 years. We've been 50 years now with this sort of emphasis on measuring sustainability, measuring through indicators. And one of the big critiques that has always come up is that, indicator sets consider some things, they don't consider other things, they include some stakeholders, they don't include other stakeholders. And so I think, in a way the STAR has kind of become, well, and what we're going to talk about in a second, and in a couple slides, it says, quite explicitly, that this sort of STAR has really addressed a lot of the past critiques of indicator systems through sheer numbers, through including everything. We've got them all. We're not leaving anything out. We're not leaving anything to sort of, this kind of idea of parsimonious measurement is sort of thrown out the window because for the sake of inclusivity.
Which makes a burdensome reporting requirement, which makes compliance down the road costly, which can serve as a feedback loop. Just what I've seen these things going in the past. This becomes,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's exactly right. So let me just kind of back up. I want to give you a little bit of theory before we continue, and a little bit of methods. Whoops, and I passed over one slide. How do I go back? Previous. Okay. Oh, I'm missing a slide. Oh, there it is. Okay. So I'll give you a few methods first. So how did I look at? I had this research interest in STAR, and my research interest it wasn't a deductive kind of a deductive process where I had this hypothesis to test. Rather, I was just kind of interested in what was going on, what the processes looked like, what role STAR played in policymaking, what role policymaking played in the development of STAR, etc. So to look at this relationship between indicators and policy processes and outcomes, I talked to 40 people. I did 40 interviews, and these interviews were done with mainly people called the sustainability director of each city. So I looked at participants in the STAR program and got a hold of their representative, their STAR representative, who was typically, had the title of sustainability director. Increasingly, cities and towns have these sustainability directors. In a few cases, it wasn't the sustainability director per se, it was a town planner or, a department head, etc. But for the most part, they were sustainability directors that were sort of undertaking and managing and overseeing the implementation of STAR. So I conducted 40 interviews with these people, and I really expected these interviews to last 20 minutes. These are the kinds of themes I was asking them, just really general questions about their engagement with STAR, to what extent they were engaging STAR, how they saw STAR kind of influencing the policy process, etc. And I expected these interviews to last 20 minutes, 25 minutes each. And it ended up, they went from, I had some that were half an hour, really quick, short ones that went half an hour, but I was on the phone for 2.5 hours with some people, which for me, these are really busy people. And so it was really interesting to me, just the fact that they were really, people were willing to sit on the phone for 2 hours with me and discuss STAR, really sort of indicated its importance to me, to people, and how interested they were in what is actually happening, that this isn't just a straightforward kind of, write it up and off you go. They were more involved than that. So yeah. So that's just a word on the methods. But I also want to give you just a kind of a word on the theory around indicators. And so the sort of theoretical treatment of indicators has evolved somewhat over the past 20 years or so. And so I have a kind of then and now. So then indicators were kind of, and this is actually a very contemporary quote, so it's not like this view is passé and archaic. It still exists, but we've kind of moved on in certain aspects of policy analysis. But this is Maureen Hart, who, I don't know, Mike, maybe you've heard of Maureen Hart. She is a consultant. She consults with towns and cities on developing indicators. She's the indicator guru. So she says, her sort of take on indicators is that they are knowledge for policy. So it's this very sort of linear approach to policy. Better knowledge equals better policy. And good policy is the policy that takes into consideration the best knowledge, period. So she says an indicator is something that helps, she kind of talks about indicators as a compass. Indicators are something that helps you understand where you are, which way you're going, and how far you are from where you want to be. A very straightforward kind of compass. A good indicator alerts you to a problem before it gets too bad and helps you recognize what needs to be done to fix the problem. And this is a really conventional sort of approach to indicators as these, knowledge for policy. Better knowledge equals better policy. Unless, of course, politics gets in the way, which is what we try to eliminate under this sort of theoretical paradigm. So now we're looking at, we've made some progress in the past decade regarding our approach to indicators, and we're looking at them as in a little bit more complicated way. Not so much as just simply knowledge for policy, but we look at indicators as actually a knowledge, and generally knowledge, as being co-produced by science and policymakers. So indicators as being co-produced at this boundary between knowledge and politics. The idea that indicators aren't just a reflection of the natural world. They're not just, things we collect good data on and they reflect the state of the world, but rather they are influenced and influence politics, and they are inherently political beings, right? It's not just knowledge about nature. It's also knowledge about how we perceive nature. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a very good friend of mine and colleague, Esther Turnhout, and her colleagues wrote this paper, and they put it really nicely. When they say that now we look at indicators, they say in order to understand development and use of indicators, it is crucial to have insight into the specific characteristics and dynamics of the management and policy processes in which they are embedded. And basically what they're saying there is they're saying context is super important. The context, the politics of how indicators are created, what's important, what's considered unimportant, how things are measured versus other ways. The decisions that are made are contextually embedded, and this is how we have to see indicators. So as a product of us, not just a product of our objective views of nature. So they emphasize context, society, dynamic interactions between context and society. They see indicators as constructs, socially constructed, made by experts, not found in nature, but made by experts, made by citizens, made by policymakers, and not neutral, factual representations of society, or of the world, but actually representative of society also. So that's sort of the difference between then and now. We've come to look at indicators as much more in a much more sort of sophisticated, contextually dependent, socially constructed way. And then there's this paper. Cash and his literally 30 co-authors have published this paper in Proceedings of National Academy of Science. And it's one of these 4-pagers that has extreme, like thousands of citations and heavy policy influence, like science papers, And the paper is about knowledge for sustainability. I think it's called Knowledge Systems for Sustainability. It's basically about what knowledge needs to be influential and usable in policy. And so, back then, the idea would have been, well, it needs to be correct, it needs to be accurate, right? But now, this paper by Cash et al. Looks at 3 other kinds of dimensions that are more sort of socially embedded. And they say that legitimacy, salience, and credibility are the things the things that knowledge needs to be characterized by to be used and influential in policy. So you can see the difference, you can see the shift. Legitimacy, salience, and credibility are not absolute concepts that can be measured objectively. They're interactive with their audience, right? We decide what's legitimate. We decide what's credible and salient. It's very, so each of these reinforces, so what I mean by legitimacy is it representative? Does it represent the interests of the elite, or is it of us all? This is the concept of legitimacy. Salience, does it resonate with us? Is it relevant to our interests and our daily struggles, etc.? And credibility, well, do the speakers have the right and the rationale to make claims? So each of these legitimacy, salience, and credibility reinforces the idea that there's nothing inherent about indicators that make them good or bad, or usable in policy or influential over policy. That these characteristics and features are relative to stakeholder groups, and they're decided and assessed by stakeholder groups. And this is really what we need to look at if we want to see how indicators can be, meaningful and influential. So that's Cash et al. Legitimacy, salience, and credibility. So I took these over the course of my interviews. My first major finding was that the sustainability directors that I talked with found that those requirements, legitimacy, salience, and credibility, they didn't put them in those terms, but these are the concepts they talked about in other terms. They found that STAR very much sort of was cutting edge in terms of these three requirements. The indicators were legitimate because they often talked about how STAR provides this standardized national framework that is really, is nationally relevant. They talked about salience in terms of STAR reflecting a broader understanding of sustainability. Eight goal areas, right? It's not just about environment anymore. It's not just about water quality anymore. It's about livability, resilience, etc. So this really was about the salience of the indicator set. And then thirdly, the credibility. STAR has been developed based on diverse expertise, 120 experts, exactly as you were saying before, right? And so the sustainability directors saw this STAR as a cutting edge program that very much has responded to critiques about indicators from the past. Critiques like they're too top-down, they're too based on the knowledge of a narrow range of experts. They don't take public opinion and public perception and perspectives into consideration. They're not representative of people that they act on. And so the sustainability directors found found STAR to be quite cutting edge in terms of these 3 aspects. But as you had mentioned before, part of what has enabled this cutting edge nature, and this goes back to the question of the person who typed in their question. Part of what has enabled this cutting edge nature of the STAR program is the sheer size of it, right? It covers everything. It's included a huge range of stakeholders. And so for this reason, feasibility is something that, not mentioned by Cash, but feasibility becomes a real issue. And people said in my interviews, almost 100% of my interviews talked about the high resource demands of data collection, the need for political support, or we're never going to get the resources dedicated to data collection that we need, but that this really made it in some cases, communities were engaging STAR only sort of half. They couldn't really engage it as deeply and as extensively as they wanted because of the resource demands for data collection. And for some communities, it meant that they basically weren't dealing with STAR at all anymore. They couldn't manage to secure the resources for data collection. And so this quote from one of my interviews is perfect. It says, one of my interviewees said, the thing that makes it great, this, how it's legitimate and salient and credible because of its sheer size in some ways, because of its size, is sort of the thing that makes it impossible to get going. It's just too big. And so, the idea here is that we add feasibility onto this legitimacy, salience, and credibility. Some of my interviewees talked about creating an abridged version of STAR called Starlight, or Star. There was another really cute. Yeah, Starlight. Yeah, exactly. To help communities engage with it, without having to go full bore. But the question is then, does it lose some of that legitimacy, salience, and credibility? Is there a fundamental tension between that cutting edge nature and the double edge? The double edge of the cutting edge, the double edge of it being just...
Was there any recognition in the community of creators of the irony of creating a sustainability set of measures that itself was not sustainable over time?
Interesting. No, but this is not that I've talked with them about, but in follow-up interviews, this is exactly the kind of thing I want to talk to them about. Yeah, but interesting. It's the super ironic.
So then I guess somewhat related to that, but let's say I believe in this, so I go all into it, right? I'm Northland, and I spend what you need to spend to get the 5 stars.
Yeah.
Should I be concerned that 20 years from now, for STAR to remain frontier and cutting edge, additional criteria have to come in, which means what I've done is obsolete, and I got to go through this again. So never the next time.
Yes, and that's an excellent point, and it's even more important than you're suggesting, because STAR is not something that they do and leave, and then they have that certification forever. It's every 3 years they have to recertify. And this certification, so they collect all the data, and then it is verified, an evaluation process of the data they've collected and the number of points they're claiming. So all of this has to happen every 3 years. So basically, this is a full-time, ongoing, never-ending cycle. They're always collecting. As long as they're members and as long as they're participating, they're always collecting data.
We have something in system dynamics we call the paradox of attraction, which means the nicer you make your, let's say, city to live in, the more people want to go there. So you have really good schools, so everybody with little kids flocks there and destroy your schools.
Yeah.
So you have to manage the attractiveness. If you get 5 stars, it's going to be an attractive place to be. And not everybody, of course, can move there, but you got to keep measuring and managing because you lose the 5 stars.
Yeah, right. Yeah, indeed. We were talking about something similar in terms of transportation, Khalid, yesterday. This idea of you have a nice transportation system, but that moves people and goods, and that can sometimes cause tensions and conflict.
10-lane highway. Well, let's all take that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's traffic jammed.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah, indeed.
I was telling Lauren about this brand new, very high quality metro bus system that built to connect Rawalpindi and Old City. Islamabad, that's swanky capital. And the people of Islamabad are not happy because those backward people from Rawalpindi come and populate their wards and stuff. So,
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that. You see that in Georgia and Atlanta. There's a huge conflict. The MARTA, which is the city, the system, cannot go to Cobb County because they're worried about, what sort of elements. And that's actually those exact same words. What elements will come into our area from this now extension? And of course, that's where a lot of people live who want to use it are sort of on the other side of that county. And so the county is sort of putting a veto on it, and it gets wrapped up in this whole thing of this discussion.
There's a lot of stories behind why the 2 largest cities in New England, Worcester and Boston, are not directly connected by a mass pike.
Oh my, really?
They purposely made it hard to go from Boston to Worcester.
So my parents told me we grew up in this
No
sort of
kidding.
designed
And you
by
notice,
that.
you would think the 2 largest cities, they directly connect them, but you can get there. Right? Route 9 used to be the old, pony, and that was a direct line. Well, why not do that with the pike? Well, politics.
So what you guys are talking about actually ties into another one of my findings, and that is, so the idea of creating a STAR community and being this stylish, progressive, high-tech community is linked not with isn't they're not so worried about or they didn't express to me so much worry about attracting everybody, but that this would enable them to attract high quality residents. So people with, and you think about gentrification and how sustainable cities and a sustainability marker can increase property values. And so they saw this as not attracting problems, but rather attracting, deflecting problems and attracting what one person called, high quality residents, but what a lot of people referred to as, professionals or up and comers or certain the right element, exactly, yeah. And they saw STAR as a way of doing that as opposed to a risk in attracting everything.
And is it happening? That it is attracting.
You can't move into Seattle, Northampton. You can't afford it.
You can't move.
At least in Seattle, the cost of living in Seattle is insane.
I see. So because of it, so
and there's no room to grow. I mean,
as a deterrent.
Yeah, so I mean, and some of the growth regulation is natural prices, the market system, and others you can use taxes and things to try and manage things.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's always people trying to find workarounds for anything, sort of virus, antivirus. It's a constant struggle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So So moving on, just a few more words. I'm just about done, and we've really covered most of what I have left to say. But this practical, logistical issue of feasibility then becomes political in that high ratings, and this came through very clearly from most of the interviews I conducted. These practicalities, that high ratings were return on investment. Basically, the more money you spent on collecting data, the higher your rating, regardless of your practices, regardless of your policies.
The less blanks I have, and
the less blanks you have, you dig. And some people talked about digging deeper. And we're doing that, but we can't afford to measure it, so it doesn't go on our report. I think the first one. In some areas we felt we were probably doing. We were already achieving the outcomes, but we didn't have the data to prove it, and it cost money to get the data. So huge investment required for data collection and managing the STAR application process, because there's a special sort of interface where you input the data on the STAR website. So managing all this is resource intensive, and it's not only about collecting the data, but it's also adapting it and formatting it to that particular interface. So you don't just have to you get the data, but then it's not in the right form or not in the right aggregate level, et cetera. And so you have to adapt the data. So that's resource intensive as well.
On that point too, it may be interesting for you. What a lot of people don't realize is in a lot of cases, any one point of data represents an entire IT system worth of programs and applications. So in terms of changing format, it's not just, adjust it like an Excel. It's an entire entrenched IT infrastructure that has to be adjusted, which may be running lots of things that now you replace that, you swap it out, and across all of these different metrics are these sort of silos of application and cost.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Yeah. So there's kind of cultures of data, sort of electronic cultures. I'm going to talk about cultures of measurement in a minute, but it's sort of like there's also these sort of electronic cultures of data, how data looks and how data is presented.
Along these lines, we were asked to go out to the Mass High Tech Council a couple of years ago, and they wanted to be the go-to website where their website would pull together data from everywhere on the Massachusetts economy, the supply side and the demand side, and you could go there, call up the data, plot it, twirl it, regress it, and then they wanted simulation models and all this stuff. And they said kind of like, so can you, WPI, do that, and can you do it like in 3 months? And everybody was like laughing because they're like clueless at how. And then Elke Rundensteiner agreed to make a beginning. And if you want to hear stories about how difficult it is just to pull existing data from existing IT systems just to one website, she's like tearing her hair out from the roots. And her team of PhD students all doing this because it's in a different format everywhere.
How interesting.
But she's done a nice job. She's able to, they can do some of what they want, and it's taken like already a year when they want to go like 3 months.
How interesting. But then compare that with, these people have one sustainability director, You know, and
The resources are there, yeah.
and you know, I asked them, well, how many, like, how much, what, like, quantify the resources you've been committing to this, and they say, well, we had a couple work study students, and we gotta, you know, are they going to be able to?
Did you ask if these were dedicated or multi-hat? The Department of Public Works and the
A lot of them
sustainability
were.
and the coach of the local team. You know, I
Yeah.
mean, it's like you're wearing a lot of hats.
Yeah. Well, and STAR wasn't the only responsibility of most people. I
Right,
mean, they
right.
had other things to do also, and not only the logistics of doing this, but they also, a big job of theirs is to sell it, because you need that political buy-in, that political support. So a lot of them were saying, you know, I spend half my time just going around presenting, making nice, so that when I go to that data analyst and say, I need this data, they are like, they're not, you know, they don't tell me to go take off, because, yeah. So a lot of it is just PR and kind of greasing the wheels as well, right? Yeah, indeed. Okay, so yeah, and why does it matter? You know, a high rating is a return. If we consider that a high rating is a return on investment, why does this matter? And of course, because a high rating matters. It does matter. There are material rewards of image. And the main reason why people get involved in this, not the only reason. I mean, people did, you know, express a lot of desire to live, you know, make their communities better and live in, you know, some better, healthier, more equitable communities. But the mayors, when they, you know, the people that really make the decisions about whether or not resources are going to be dedicated to this, they're interested in the material rewards, attracting. You know, if they're a 5-star community, they attract new, fresh businesses, they attract entrepreneurs, they attract those high-quality people, and this very much was one of the incentives for getting involved. So there are certainly material rewards of an image of sustainability, sustainable cities, and this goes back to my students from the very beginning, right? How they see sustainability. They're progressive, they're clean, they're peaceful, they're middle class or better or stylish. They're stylish places that attract business investments and these high quality residents. Entrepreneurial, creative, innovative, etc. This is just, you know, this is kind of what people associate with sustainability. So there's that. And then there's this issue of realigning governance priorities that you were talking about. And that definitely came through in the interviews. People were saying, you know, that the second quote is the best. Low-hanging fruit in terms of policy means things that are politically easy. So going after things like a bike share program, well, no one's going to make a fuss instead of, you know, one of the other indicators refers more to sort of low-income housing. Well, that's a little more politically tenuous. So the system, in a way, sort of incentivizes going after the sort of easy bike share.
A building system for energy sustainability called LEED certified silver platinum, and you get points. And everyone found out that if you put plants on the roof, you get points, and that's fairly easy because no one's going to complain. So they would figure out, and they would have certain things that were exactly like this, and they'd be like, we're platinum LEED certified, and it's because we have plants on the roof, and we have, you know, an elevator. I mean, it's just kind of
exactly.
I do a lot with the Montezuma Regional Planning Commission, right? And they live on soft money, so their folks know every in and out of every grant program, federal and state, and they'll tell you what's hot and what's not. So we would go from the planning board to Sterling, and we'd say, we really need to build a retirement, elder service center, so the elderly residents can go and have meals and play cards and what have you. And they would say, well, that's a wonderful thing to aspire to, but that's not hot. The money is, the hot money now is regionalization. So if you would come to us and say, we want to take our fire department and regionalize it by meshing it in some fashion with Princeton and Holden, with a common dispatcher and sharing a pumper truck or something. Loads of money for that, because somebody has deemed that's what we're going to start funding now, and they don't care about the elderly right now. That used to be hot 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, that's the low-hanging fruit. So let's write a proposal about regionalizing something.
Yeah. 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 Totally. Yeah. Indeed. Okay. So cheap points, easy points, cheap points, etc. And then just a final comment, you know, on how this indicator system really supports the development of this culture of measurementality. You know, it is when we measure it. it is important when we measure it. This idea of this obsession with quantification, and there are a few works, I won't go into them now, but there are a few kind of very classic works in science and technology studies in STS.
Deming, the sort of the scientific management of if you don't measure it, you can't control it.
Right, right.
The motto of the Econometric Society is knowledge is measurement.
Right, okay, yeah. So Theodore Porter wrote this book called Trust in Numbers. It's become a classic. And it documents our cultural tendency to trust what is numerical, regardless of how it was put together, or sort of the whole black boxing of all of the processes that happen to get to
the consensus measure that kind of
exactly.
people agree on. That's what we can collect.
Yeah, exactly. So this idea that measurements and quantification in particular is objective and transparent. So it's good for governance because it's democratic and transparent. But these claims to objectivity and transparency often mask, as we're talking about, they mask the politics of both processes and outcomes, be they more or less equitable, etc. So that's the final word, and just a few conclusions. So there might be this tension between cutting edge and the double edge of feasibility, and certainly there's more to STAR than is suggested by this information deficit model of the relationship from knowledge to policy. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the middle. And STAR is probably measuring and rewarding some things in addition to sustainability. That's likely to be true. There's questions around the implications of setting data-driven policy priorities. So what's in the future? I think one of you were, maybe Alex, one of you was talking about this. What's going to happen in the future? How are people going to engage this in the future? And I think this is a really interesting question. Is it going to have enough? Is it enough bang for their buck? Is it going to fade? Is it going to achieve sort of popularity and dominance in terms of the sustainability discourse? That is certainly what they're going for. And what does that mean for what city, sort of the haves and the have-nots, the cities that can afford to invest and are rewarded for that investment versus, what happens to the rest of cities, and what does that mean for equity between urban centers in the U.S., etc. So,
Lorraine, have you written this?
I have, and it was just accepted 2 days ago. So there's
Is it
two.
possible to share?
Yeah.
Drafts?
Absolutely, yeah. So there are two papers, and the first one is the one that was just accepted to ecological indicators. It's called The Double Edge of Cutting Edge, and it's basically about the feasibility problem. And then paper number 2 I'm writing now, and it's about those political implications. Yeah.
Years ago, like 20 years ago, I was working with a group called Truckee Meadows Tomorrow. That's Sparks and Reno,
Where I live. We're out in Firmly, right just outside Sparks.
Once again,
It's a small world.
it's a small 6 degrees or something. So when I was working with them, they were similar to Sustainable Seattle. They had this huge laundry list of indicators that they were measuring. So they would gather once a month at the library, and the local high school biology teacher would say, "I'm a biology teacher, I'll go measure the water quality once a month in the Truckee River and report." And then what they would do is they'd say, "Here are 4 measurements, and the water quality, the trend is up. We're moving towards sustainability." And I was like, the economist who's gonna throw water on the campfire. So the reason they hired me, which by the way, since there's casinos, you go out there, you stay in a casino hotel, they pay you money, and you go downstairs and gamble. I digress.
That's a sustainable. That is, casinos are sustainable.
On the other hand, but I said, and to go into the longer term thing, I said this cries out for modeling, dynamic modeling. Not surprising given who's in the room. System over here, you get more of this but less of this and whatever, and then over time it changes and there's feedbacks and stuff. And I said it's very hard with so many different indicators that are interacting and stuff to get a handle on are you really moving towards. So with the STAR system, I see now, unlike Truckee Meadows Tomorrow in the old days and Sustainable Seattle, the other manifestations of this, now at least they have a scoring system. But I think in addition to the indicators fraught with all the politics and subjectivity and what have you, as in terms of how they're created and who's deciding what we're going to measure and all that stuff, which is absolutely true and legitimate, I think there needs to be other tools that take the indicators and do stuff with them in an intelligent way to be able to make more conclusions about are we being more sustainable, how we define it, and what have you. And lastly, confront the voting rules and the like how do you find out if society at large, if that number is going up from the star rating, well, how do we know that society is approving that or it's increasing social utility or social welfare? And that sort of place you can necessarily conclude that because the numbers are going up, social welfare, social satisfaction is going up. We would hope it would be, and it very well may. But you get into a whole, well, how do you really know? We talked about that in his PhD.
So last week when I was talking to the Wesleyan crowd about this, there's a biologist in the crowd who had actually worked for STAR. They had asked him for some feedback, and he did some research, and he showed that there are over 1 million ways that you could become a 5-star community. And he said, let me tell you, some of those ways, some of those combinations, you wouldn't want to live in those places. Interesting, but so it's not saying that it's useless because it's not about. The problem is when indicators become the only and exclusive guide, right? I mean, we have other ways of telling and saying, and indicators are part of a bigger puzzle. They're not the thing, but that kind of goes to show that we need the other pieces as well. Citizen talking to citizens, deliberative panels, kind of discussion of social benefits.
Where are you taking this? Is this kind of where these questions are? Are you going to go forward with it?
Well, I'm going to write my next paper first, and then I don't know. I think what I want to do is send. I'm going to send the research to my interviewees and see what they have to say about it. And but I think the future of STAR would be an interesting.
Or other programs like this, because there are other ones that there's performance.gov was a big initiative, and the President there's OMB owns that. Right. The military has sets of these that they do, like Installation Management Command effectively has 120 cities, military bases that they own worldwide, and they have 1,200 measures that they track, but it's very similar. So I mean, there may be compare contrast some of those. And performance.gov is recent, so it's in the last 8 years. Yeah. It's the OMB. Owns it. You can actually go on performance.gov, and it's the website that matches. It's like where the housing department, but being on the DoD side of that, they're like, give us your measures, and it was kind of opt-in. DoD could say, here are our measures, and DoD said, here's the ones we're winning at. We're going to provide the measures we're looking good at. So I mean, it's an interesting dynamic, which is one
I think a cool project, might even be a doctoral student project, is to take this framework and make a game out of it, a system dynamics game, a collaborative game where you can step through time making decisions, and you can see a collection of these indicators represented, not the whole thing.
Yeah.
And you can see as you're stepping through time making decisions how you're pushing this way, that way, and this is growing and that's shrinking and whatever.
So make it generic, not necessarily just stay in the middle, but the concept of selecting indicators and using them and building systems to manage from.
Yeah, you might even ask the participants to pick. You can pick 10 indicators, pick 10. And then the machine will keep track of them as you're making your decisions and stepping through time and seeing did you make your city better or not, and so forth. I think that sort of thing is another twist on this that would be kind of interesting, sort of inform people about this in sort of a fun and engaging way.
Very
cool. Collaborative project.
Cool. I'm all up for collaboration.
All the doctoral students are leaving now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Brainwash them. Well, you're still around there. Wait a minute.
Thank you.
Nice job. Very good.
Thank you.
Very interesting.
Thanks, you guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
See, this actually goes hand in hand with my research.
The invite. That was awesome.
No problem at all.
Insurgency comes up. My wife's family is from she grew up in Sparks.
Okay.
So